Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. My name is Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week we are continuing our deep dive into fighting games. This time we're getting to the good stuff, though. Right, Mike? This is where it really takes a turn and actually becomes good games instead of just like kind of fun distractions.
Instead of a random collection of weird games, we're talking about Street Fighter today.
Yes!
So this is the series that started it all. We're going to talk about Street Fighter 1 for a little bit, but we're going to spend most of our time on Street Fighter 2 because that's really where the magic happened. So
all right.
My main sources for this game are the Hardcore Gaming 101 article that I used for the last two early fighting games episodes, and then this one for Street Fighter 2, there's a video called The Making of Street Fighter 2, hey, wouldn't you know, by Jordan HJ. That's their name on YouTube. It is a very good video if you're interested in getting much more context of what I'm talking about. So if you're into this, I highly suggest you watch it. But first, let's start with Street Fighter 1, developed by Capcom. It came out on August 30th, 1987. It arrived on the arcade, TurboGrafx CD, IBM PC, Atari ST, the Amiga, the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PSP. And if you thought that was a lot of consoles to rattle off, well, just you wait to when I get to Street Fighter 2. So,
oh my gosh. Are we going to cover all the different Street Fighter 2s? There's like a million different editions.
At the end,
I'm just excited. I'll get you. I'll let you get there.
At the end, I have lists. I have lists? I straight up screen capped the tables on Wikipedia so we can go down the list because I was like, I'm not going to write all these down. I'm just going to screen cap them and put them on there.
Street Fighter 2 is an entire series unto itself.
It really is. So the number of copies sold for Street Fighter 1, though, is 1,000 arcade units, and it is in the fighting genre. That makes sense, right? Because we're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It started, it's actually like a groundbreaking achievement, I would say, because it didn't really win any awards, is that this game started the idea of secret special moves that were not given to the players ahead of time, that you had to find those out for yourself. So that's kind of why Street Fighter 1 is big. And Street Fighter 1 is big because it spawned Street Fighter 2. But the average time to complete is 1 to 5 hours, depending on how completionist you are. I think 5 hours is like if you beat it with every single like way and character and get a perfect score and all that jazz or whatever. I don't know. But the Metacritic score doesn't have one for this.
Too old.
Yeah. So this is kind of what I did. The arcade version is better received than the ports for sure. So I want to mention that because like the Amiga and Atari ST ports of this game got 2s out of 10s.
Yeesh.
So yeah, the arcade version is what's great, but only a certain arcade version is great. And we're going to get to that too. So the gameplay of Street Fighter 1, and this is kind of where it all starts. So since Street Fighter 2 is the birth of modern fighting games, you have to start somewhere, and this is where we're starting with Street Fighter 1. Some differences that I didn't know about in the original Street Fighter. In the original Street Fighter, you could only play as Ken or Ryu. I did not know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And they're like the same character anyway, right?
Yeah, is Ken or Ryu. And you actually, if you play as player 1, you have to be Ryu. The only way you can play as Ken is if you play a 2-player match in the beginning and the controlling Ken player defeats Ryu.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the only way. The enemies include Retsu, who is an expelled Shirinji Kempo instructor, Geki, who is a talon-wielding ninja, Joe, an underground full-contact karate champion, Mike, a former heavyweight boxer who's not at all like Mike Tyson, right? There's no way. Lee, who is an expert in Chinese boxing, Jen, who is an elderly professional killer, a hitman, who's developed their own like assassination art.
Wow.
England. This is from the country of England. Birdie, who is a tall bouncer who uses a combination of wrestling and boxing. Eagle, who is a well-dressed bodyguard of a wealthy family, and they use Kali sticks to fight people. And then after those 8 challengers, then you are taken to Thailand for the last 2 bad guys, big bad bosses. Adon, who is a Muay Thai master, and Sagat, who is the emperor of Muay Thai, and the game's final opponent. And Sagat actually is the only other character besides Ken and Ryu to come back for the second game, which is interesting. They kind of they dump all these characters and start with new ones for Street Fighter 2.
It's probably the right choice.
Yeah. So what was kind of funny to me about this when reading through the Hardcore Gamer list is they kind of tore apart Street Fighter 1, and the main reason they tore it apart was the controls. And this is, quote, "The problem is the original Street Fighter just doesn't work very well. The controls are among the worst in the fighting game history, as they don't work most of the time. Trying to execute a special move is a crapshoot." End quote. And the reason that people had a really hard time with this, and this is kind of the biggest takeaway from Street Fighter 1, is when this game came out, they had a deluxe, quote, I'm putting that in big quotes, deluxe arcade cabinet. And instead of the 6 buttons that we know and love today, it had 2 giant pressure-sensitive pads that you would hit. And if you hit it lightly, it would do a light move. If you hit it heavy, it would do a heavy move. If you hit it medium, it would do a medium move.
Oh,
here's
that
the whole point of
seems
this.
hard to do.
Exactly. It was super inaccurate and terrible. So they actually ditched the deluxe cabinets and stopped making them and switched it over to the 6-button layout that we now know and love today. And that made the game a little bit better. But if you're asking yourself, hey, Tyler, I'm pretending I'm you right now. Is there a plot to Street Fighter? You'd be right, Tyler. There is a plot to Street Fighter.
There is a plot to Street Fighter.
It's very, very light. In the plot is that it's essentially Enter the Dragon from Bruce Lee. The only difference is now you're traveling to different locations around the globe instead of an island. So while the plot is light, there is still a plot there. And there is a plot point from this game that is carried over to the second game, which we'll talk about later. So the development of this game, Takashi Nishiyama came up with the idea for Street Fighter after working on IREM's 1984 beat 'em up called Kung Fu Master, which we talked about. It was known as Spartan X in Japan. And that featured a number of boss fights. So you already now have, like, Street Fighter is kind of all boss fights in a way. It's one-on-one, right? Following the success of Kung Fu Master, Nishiyama was then hired by Capcom, and he designed an arcade successor for Capcom called Trojan, which was a beat 'em up which evolved like the basic game concepts of Kung Fu Master into this new beat 'em up game. Nishiyama then subsequently went on to design Street Fighter. In addition to his previous work on Kung Fu Master, Nishiyama also took inspiration from popular Japanese shonen manga at the time, as well as the fighting game Karate Champ and Yi Are Kung Fu. Which are 2 games we talked about a little bit in our early fighting games.
So these older games are like important because they give a little bit of like inspiration to Street Fighter. Yeah.
I guess I really did a long-winded way of saying those 2 early episodes were long-winded ways of saying that Street Fighter and Street Fighter 2 did not miraculously come from nothing. There was a lot of experimentation before that got Street Fighter 2 to what it is and what we know and love. Like I said before, though, Enter the Dragon and Street Fighter are similarly centered around international fighting tournaments, so you have that. In terms of gameplay, like it's kind of a hodgepodge of Karate Champ, Kung Fu Master, and Yi Are Kung Fu, and that's kind of the template of the Street Fighter gameplay model. Now, where did Hadouken come from? Okay, this is important.
I've always wanted to know.
Everyone wants to know. Nishiyama, the game's creator, credits that to an energy attack called Haduo, which is from the 1970 anime series Space Battleship Yamato. And that is the origin of Hadouken. So not even Hadouken came from nowhere. You know, It came from somewhere. That's the whole point. But this is really all we're going to talk about with Street Fighter 1. So the big closing statement of Street Fighter 1, the legacy is, while Street Fighter 1 isn't as well regarded as Street Fighter 2, it's still a decent game. And if I had to say, is it worth playing in 2021? Unless you're a huge Street Fighter fan and you want to know like where it all came from, probably not. You should just play Street Fighter 2. Because as we're going to talk about during the development of Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior, which is what the full name is called of the first release of the game, it was so tested and so practiced, and it's just really polished. Like Street Fighter 2 is an amazing game in the fact that it had all the development time it needed, and the team worked really, really hard to make it good. You know, whereas I feel like a lot of those early fighting games are like, we're just making something, throwing it out there, and we're moving on to the next one. Street Fighter 2 is good because they really took their time with it, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So, Street Fighter 2, The World Warrior, was developed by Capcom, and it was released on the following systems. In the arcade, it came out in 1991, in February in Japan, and in March around the world. In SNES, it came out in 1992, from June to December, essentially, is like the the region it came out. Japan was first, then North America, then Australia, then UK, then Europe. It did come out on MS-DOS.
I did not know that.
For all you DOS fans out there, July 10th, 1992 in Europe, and April 26th, 1993 in North America. It came out on the Amiga in 1992, the Atari ST in 92, the Amstrad CPC also at the end of 92, December 31st, 1992. The Commodore 64. It came out for the Commodore 64 actually in Europe in August 20th, 1992. So still a year after the initial release, but it got on there faster. The ZX Spectrum also came out in September 92. The CPS changer. Did we ever talk about this? What the CPS changer is?
I don't know.
Yeah, that was Japan only, July 14th, 1994. And then it came out on the Game Boy on August 11th, 95 in Japan, and September 1995 in North America. And then a little bit later in Europe in 1995. So it's hard to get an accurate sales statement for Street Fighter 2 because there were about a bazillion different editions of this game. But it is estimated to have grossed a total of $10.61 billion in revenue.
Wow.
And as of 2017, it is on the list of the top 3 highest grossing video games of all time, along with Space Invaders and Pac-Man. That's right. Mario's not even on that list. Isn't that crazy?
That is kind of crazy to me. I guess it makes sense that these arcade games would be higher up because there are probably a lot of people who just spent hundreds of dollars playing, just dropping quarters into these games, you know?
Oh, yeah. And we're going to talk about the culture of that and how the culture of that made it so that people did do that and just dropped a ton of stuff in there for it. So, yeah, it's pretty unique. There's a lot of things that Street Fighter did that were unique, and how it modeled itself as an arcade game and how you put coins into it is pretty important as well. We'll get to that later. So, fighting games, genre, of course, that's what we're all here for. Awards, accolades, or groundbreaking achievements. I'm kind of going to save that for the legacy section at the end of the game, at the end of the episode, because I think that there's just a lot to talk about for what it did, and I want to make sure we talk about that, when it's time, at the end, when it's appropriate. Okay. Mm-hmm. Average time to complete on how long to beat. It doesn't really have one. I kind of skipped this section because it's not like, I guess if you went and tried to beat it with all the characters, but didn't seem important to me. Metacritic score, there are so many additions. Just know it's good. Okay. It's a very good game. So let's talk about the gameplay of Street Fighter 2. So here are the big differences between Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2. First is, after every third match in single player mode of Street Fighter 2, you actually do a bonus stage. Did you know that? I didn't know about this.
I did not know that.
Maybe I never got that far. That's really what happened. And this kind of came from Final Fight, which is a game that we're going to talk about that kind of influenced Street Fighter, and kind of not influenced Street Fighter, but it did. But it influenced Capcom to make a Street Fighter sequel. So, and in that game, you would do all these like breaking barrels and cars and stuff like that. And they added it into Street Fighter 2 because it's like a fun thing to add to break up the action a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is multiple playable characters. There are 8 playable characters in the game and 4 non-playable characters, and those are the bosses in the game. But the next thing they did is they changed special moves in a certain way that made it so they actually were possible to do. We're going to get more into this later, but essentially special moves in Street Fighter 1 were super hard to put in. I didn't know this. Not only because you had terrible pressure smashy controls that were awful, but you also didn't have the timing right. The timing was really difficult in Street Fighter 1, so they really fixed that in Street Fighter 2. But the original roster of Street Fighter 2 has 8 playable characters, and you can essentially go across a tournament of 7 of the main fighters, and then you go on to the final 4 opponents. And so you could play any of those 8 playable characters and fight any of the other ones. And there's also 2-player mode, which is pretty sweet and kind of the reason that the game got so big. So we're going to talk about that too. But let's go through the characters a bit. This should probably go into the development section. We're kind of starting that a little bit. But one thing Street Fighter 2 did is make the fighting genre character-driven more than any game before it. The character designs were really in-depth and were a part of the development process. The devs took a lot of time to work on. And this pretty much set the formula for fighting games from Street Fighter 2 onward. So when developing the characters, they kind of did an order of how they developed each character, and I want to go over the order now. So the first thing they ever did is they chose a nationality, because Street Fighter 2 was a world tournament. So they had to pick the nationality. They then did a rough sketch of the character, like the designer of that character went, sketched it out, brought it to the team, they talked about it, kind of figured that out. Next, they did the movements and animations of that character, because movements and animations were super important because of memory space, which we'll also talk about in a bit when we get to the tech spec section. That's right, Street Fighter 2 was so big, I had to divide it into more sections than normal because it's kind of a big game. So, and then the last thing they did when they had a character is they tested it for balance. And testing for balance kind of moved off of the character development part, because in the end they were crunching to test the balance of this entire game. So I will talk about that later on too, but let's go through each playable character. So you have Ryu, who is a Japanese martial artist who wears a white gi, very popular. Honda, a sumo wrestler in Japan, and his whole goal for fighting is because he wants to get rid of the negative reputation of sumo wrestling and be like a legitimate sport, which I think is cool.
All right.
Yeah, Blanca, who was my favorite character, who is a beast-like mutant from Brazil, who was raised in the jungle and enters the tournament to uncover the origins of his forgotten past. Fun fact, the devs made him green as a joke, and it stuck. So that's why Blanca's green. Just a joke. Guile, who is a former U.S. Air Force Special Forces operative, and they actually made Guile because they wanted to make an American to like make it so Americans wanted to play the game, and they just made him straight up what they thought an American looked like. And the funniest part is it worked. He is the most popular character in America.
All right.
Ken, who is Ryu's best friend, also his greatest rival and former training partner. Fun fact about Ken and Ryu, they had the same master, and that's why their fighting style is exactly the same. Yeah,
okay,
that's right.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. Good explanation.
Yeah, there you go. Chun Li, who is probably one of the most popular characters, I think, in Street Fighter, and she is a Chinese martial artist who also is an Interpol officer, and she seeks to avenge her deceased father. Zangief, who is a professional wrestler and sambo fighter from the Soviet Union. He aims to prove Soviet strength is the strongest form of strength, and he likes defeating American opponents. Also, the funny thing about Zangief, and I didn't write this down, is one of the creators loved professional wrestling, so when they made this character, they were just like giddy. You know, because this character is so ridiculous. He's got like hair coming off of his shins. It's amazing. It's just fantastic. The last character we're going to talk about that's playable is Dolce, who is a fire-breathing yoga master from India. Even though he is a pacifist, he uses the money earned from fighting in order to lift people out of poverty. Another fun fact from development is the stretchy punches were just like Blanca being green, a complete joke, and then it stuck. Because but the way they pull off the stretchy punches with memory is he actually has 2 less animation frames when he walks than any other character.
Oh.
So like most of the characters has 6 animation frames when they're walking. Dalsim only has 2, and that's how they kind of free up space so he can do the stretchy punches. Because otherwise, like he's taking up a lot of memory. Because memory's a problem.
It takes up too much space.
Yeah, that's right. CPU exclusive characters. These are only the characters that you fight in the tournament. Balrog, who is an American boxer with a similar appearance to Mike Tyson. He is called M. Bison in Japan. You're going to notice a lot of name shifting between the next 4 characters, which I think is funny. And the reason he's Balrog in the US is because he was M. Bison, and they were like, that's too similar to Mike Tyson. We don't want to get sued, so we changed it to Balrog. Well, Vega is a Spanish bullfighter who wields a claw and uses ninjutsu. Vega is called Balrog in Japan. So in America, they just took Balrog, moved it to... and then took it off, took Balrog from Vega, moved it to M. Bison, and then called Vega Vega. It's really confusing, but they moved a lot of stuff around. Sagat is back. He's the Muay Thai fighter that you fought at the end of Street Fighter 1. And this is the plot point. He has a giant scar across his chest because canonically Ryu defeats him in the first game and gives him that scar across his chest from a dragon punch. So there you go. That's the sweet
Shoryuken.
The sweet plot point that is transferred over from Street Fighter 1 to Street Fighter 2. And the last character is called M. Bison, and he is the leader of the criminal organization Shadaloo, which is also like the plot of this whole game is that...
there's a criminal shadow organization.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that in a second, but it's Shadaloo. But what's funny is in Japan, he's called Vega. So again, the name shifting.
Just shuffle those names around.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. So the plot of this game is the leader of Shadaloo, Bison in the US or Vega in Japan, in his global domination plan, sets up a world fighting tournament to select the best fighters to work in his Shadaloo organization by brainwashing them. So Bison is trying to brainwash all of these fighters into working for him. The problem is, every time I hear Shadaloo, I think of the ABBA song Waterloo. So
Shadaloo.
Yeah, it's really good. It works, right? It works perfectly.
Yeah, it totally does.
It's hard to really take it seriously. Shadaloo. Okay. But yeah, so that's the plot and the characters. Now let's talk about the development. So we talked earlier about the not great Street Fighter 1 pressure-sensitive controls and how they had been, well, just very bad, to put it frankly. It turned out that fix that they did, the 6-button layout, was so successful that was one of the driving forces by making a sequel for this game. Yeah, so and there was that, the control scheme, and also the game Final Fight in the US, which is a beat 'em up. And that control scheme and then the game Final Fight made Capcom realize, hey, there's potentially some money here with these fighting games, and we should try to make another arcade game for that. And Yoshiki Akamoto recounted that, quote, the basic idea at Capcom was to revive Street Fighter, a good game concept to make it a better playing arcade game, end quote. So the whole goal here was to make the best fighting game they could possibly make. And the team was like super passionate about this, and you could see it in how hard they worked on it. Like it's pretty crazy. They described it as like crunch time work, but everyone was cool with it because they knew they were making something amazing that had never been done before. Still not a good reason to do crunch time, because it's bad for people, but at least the team was into it. Street Fighter 2 was developed by a team of 35 to 40 people over 2 years for an estimated budget of $2,450,000, which if you think about how they made like $10 billion over time,
Pretty good investment.
Pretty good turnaround on your money. And that is equivalent to $4.6 million in 2020 dollars, if people are curious about the old inflation calculator. So the initial concept, actually, which is funny, I think, was to have the game take place on an island. That's right. It would have been even more like a ripoff of Enter the Dragon, which Enter the Dragon comes up in every single game. It's amazing. But they decided to scrap the island idea and instead do this globe-trotting stages where each stage belonged to a fighter and it was their nationality and place of origin. And that is amazing. Like, I remember, like, the stage in E Honda in the bathhouse is like a super famous fighting stage, and I loved it. It was so fun. And also like the Dolce with like the live elephants in the background, and then you have Guile where it's like on an Air Force base, and it's just totally fine that these two people are fighting each other on an Air Force base and people are like cheering in the background. It's super fun. But the two big things that the Street Fighter 2 devs wanted to fix about previous fighting games in general, this is not just Street Fighter 1, this is all of those games on our list, is terrible hitboxes. Like, the hitboxes in early fighting games were usually not very good, and they wanted to make it feel well. And the second is player input feeling better, because before it was slightly off or it was too fast, and it kind of made the game feel unresponsive. So that was the two things that they focused on first to make the game really play well. And this game was a team effort. Like, everyone kind of had a say on the team if they had an idea to throw it out there. The only two rules they had in development were it had to be a sequel to Street Fighter and it had to be a one-on-one fighting game that included jumping. Anything else, like throw any other idea in, as long as it doesn't contradict those two ideas, we're going to look at it and think about it. And it's really cool. Like, you should watch that YouTube video if you're interested, because there's some really cool concept art they show of characters that didn't make it into the game. For example, Vega, as in Vega, the United States version of Vega, who has the claws, was originally like a Templar ninja. It's kind of weird looking. Like, it had like the Templar cross on his chest, and he had like a sword. It was very... They had so many iterations of each character. It's really interesting to watch. And so I highly suggest you look at the old video on YouTube, and I will try to remember to put that into the Discord. I've been really bad about that, but I will try to remember. So the team actually took a lot of pride in their playtesting and figuring out what felt good to play. And this is a big part of Street Fighter 2's success. An example of something strange when you think about it, but felt right in the game, is the fact that the player jumps farther backwards than forwards. Did you ever notice this?
No, but I guess it makes sense for like defensive if you want to.
Yeah.
If you want to sort of like give people a reason to defend themselves, it's like make defending maybe have a slight advantage in that sense, because then it encourages people to use the defense, and then that adds depth to the game.
Exactly. It definitely added like a different defensive aspect, because before, I mean, we're going to talk about play styles. It's funny because the play style of the game actually is based on where you live in the world. Japanese players play the game differently than American players, it turns out. Like American players use more like offensive. They're both kind of like running into each other and punching all over the place. You know, like Transformers fighting is how Americans fight.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. And then Japanese players tended to be more like reserved and use like defensive back jumping and try to like time their shots and stuff, which I thought was pretty interesting. But this is one of the reasons they have that jumping farther backwards and forwards in there. Is for that reason. I thought that was cool. The designer Akira Nishitani actually also designed a brand new AI system for Street Fighter 2. And he had to do this because the CPU characters and the PC characters are the same characters that have the same move set. So in order to create balance, they had to make a brand new AI system, because the first Street Fighter game, you were fighting. The only player you fought that was a player character was Ken, you know, technically, and it didn't really matter. But before, like AIs before, I guess this time were seriously like, we're just going to spam a couple moves on you, and that's the AI for it. So they wanted to fix that, which is pretty cool. Fun fact, by the way, if you want to be better at Street Fighter 2, the vanilla version on arcade or Super Nintendo, I think it works too, the AI struggles the most against Dalsim. So there's your pro tip for the day.
Okay, good to know.
The AI can't handle Dalsim. And
can't handle the stretchy arms.
Can't handle the stretchy arms. And also, before they fixed it, it used to be you could do like reverse punches, like you could punch backward and forward, and that really messed the AI up. So they fixed that. So it's just forward punching only, because I guess it really messed the AI up beforehand. So to solve bugs caused by having so many characters with so many moves, because if you think about it, there's 10 characters there's 12 technically. 8 of them are playable, and each one of them has their own move set with different animations and hitting different hitboxes. That's a lot of just numbers, you know, to figure out. So to fix that, they did a lot of play testing, and they would use total strangers to test the game, since they found that those were the ones that encountered glitches the team had never seen before. So they would just find people like, hey, play this game. What do you think? You know, to figure it out.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, there are also a couple glitches that are left in the game intentionally. The first is there is a 1 in 256 chance that if a player hits the regular move button, a special move would occur. And this was done on purpose because they want new players to find out there are special moves and like get a sense of mystery and try to figure it out.
It's like, how did I do that?
Yeah, exactly. It's to plant a little seed in your head to be like, there's something I'm missing here and I need to learn it. And then you got to go research it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so they left that in there. But there's also some other, we're going to talk about a couple more glitches kind of near the end of this, but they involve fighters having certain weaknesses that weren't planned. And we'll talk about those at the end. I think that's pretty fun. So I think the big thing about this game, and we mentioned it before, is that the combo system, and that combo system actually came completely by accident. So here is a quote from Noritaka Funamitsu about the combo system. Quote, "While I was making a bug check during the car bonus stage, I noticed something strange. Curious, I taped the sequence and we saw that during the punch timing, it was possible to add a second hit, and so on. I thought this was something impossible to make useful inside a game, as the timing balance was so hard to catch. So we decided to leave the feature as a hidden one. The most interesting thing is that this became the base for future titles. Later, we were able to make the timing more comfortable and the combo into a real feature. In Street Fighter 2, we thought if you got the perfect timing, you could place several hits, up to 4, I think. Then we managed to place 8. A bug? Maybe." So that's the end quote. Essentially what he's saying there is they found that the problem with Street Fighter 1's combo system is players didn't have the time to enter them, as we talked about earlier. And so by giving players more time, what this did is it let new players enter in the combos, but it also let skilled players enter in multiple combos before they actually fired on screen. And this is how they created the modern fighting genre combo system. So if you play a fighting game and you put out combos. Hey, you can thank Street Fighter 2 for timing this out for you on accident. I think it's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So while the team was crunching in those final months before release, I mentioned earlier about some bugs that were happening, and it turns out that these bugs actually became character attributes later in the game. For example, Ken is slightly stronger than Ryu, and this is because Ryu is programmed to take extra damage after Hadouken attack, and Ken is not. Also, Blanca could take lots of damage from the Hadouken while he was doing his rolling attack. And you'd be like, that's kind of a problem, right? And the devs were actually really upset about this, but players just thought this was a part of the character attributes in the game. So it kind of became the meta. Like, you don't play Blanca into Ken or Ryu, you know?
Oh, or you do because, he takes lots of damage from that.
Yeah, he takes more damage from rolling. So it's like kind of an interesting moveset thing, which is kind of neat. On the last day of development, they discovered that Guile also was very overpowered, and they had to fix the moveset the night before the final version went out to manufacturers. Guile was super OP, apparently. His one of his jump kicks or something was just doing tons of damage, and they had to fix that.
That must be so nerve-wracking to have to find those bugs before you send it off to manufacturers, because if you miss it, it's like, well, all these arcade cabinets exist now and they all have this bug, and it's unusable because players only play Guile because he's super OP. Like, you can't fix it later. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty terrible. They also they were working on this consistently for, months. This is trying to fix this whole problem. It took them so long to get these things done. So yeah, it's nerve-wracking stuff for sure. And this is what I was talking about with the crunch. This is what they were crunching on. Just hours and hours and hours of playtesting. So let's talk about the tech of the game. Okay. So the quality of animation in this game, because Street Fighter 2 looks pretty. It still holds up, I think, to this day. It looks really good.
Yeah. The pixel art looks great.
And part of it is because the use of the CPS-1 hardware. Now, Capcom had been using the CPS-1 for a while, but the main difference is they did a 48 megabit size chip, which is a lot at the time.
That's pretty big, yeah.
And they could do a lot of stuff with that memory. For example, Ryu could take up to 8 megabits, while Zangief could take 12. So they could mix and match for different characters if some characters needed more than others. And fun fact, the physically bigger characters do need more memory than the smaller characters. But what ended up happening is they spent a lot of money on this, and it did work out in the end. Spoilers, it made over $10 billion. But they did have to cut some stuff from the game. And so here are some things they had to cut because of memory sizes. The intro cutscenes, the weak points, the responsive AI, the dizzy damage. Did you know that characters can dizzy? There was a thing that would make it so it's you do extra damage if they got dizzy. They cut that out. There were originally KO animations, finishing animations. And then finally mirror matches. And this is where it goes back to what I was just saying about how larger characters couldn't be on the same screen at the same time. You can't have two Zangiefs because they're too big and they'll crash the game. There won't be enough memory, which is funny. And then also there were some certain special moves that were cut out of the game. For example, Chun Li had a backflip kick that was cut from the game. It was cut for memory, but it also was cut because it was crazy powerful and super hard to fight against. So there's that too. The music of the game, which I think is something that's really well noted. This game, every single aspect of it's amazing. The music's fantastic, the gameplay, everything. It's so good. But the music was mostly done by Yoko Shimomura, and she was just told, every fighter needs a theme song. Those were her instructions. She's like, hey, okay, every fighter needs a theme song. Go. And she based the music off of the locales and less about the characters themselves. So she looked at the levels they were fighting in and kind of wrote songs for that, which is pretty cool. And the crazy thing is the reason she got the job is she was just the one open composer at the time, not assigned to any projects. So she was just assigned to Street Fighter.
Just luck of the draw. She got to work on Street Fighter 2. Wow.
Yeah. And it was in the end, it's one of her favorite things she's ever worked on, she said. And weirdly enough, it's the only Street Fighter game she worked on because she later went on to work at Square 2 years later. Isayo Abe also was a Capcom newcomer as far as the composer goes, and they also did some tracks on the Versus screen, Sagat's theme, and then Here Comes a New Challenger. So they did those three, while Yoko Shimomura did everything else. And honestly, Guile's theme, there's so many bangers. They're so good. This game is oops all bangers, okay? If you haven't listened to it, It should all be in this. I'm sure it is already in the soundtrack section of the Discord, but it is so good. All right. Finally, we're going to talk about the release and the legacy of Street Fighter 2. So, in the initial tests, the game actually did not do very well. They predicted 300 plays a day, and instead they got 98 plays a day. This is the arcade versions. Like each cabinet would get 300 plays a day. They only got 98 plays a day. And this is actually because Japanese players didn't want to play with strangers.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Capcom then spent like a whole lot of money on marketing this game as a multiplayer game. And this actually helped get the game started. And it became a big hit in Japan, like kind of steamrolled over time. Funny enough, though, in the US, in the West in general, like Europe too, the game was like an instant hit. It did not need that marketing because it turns out people in the US didn't care about playing against strangers. They're just like looking for people to play with. So,
all right.
Yeah, but the game changed arcades in more ways than one. First, it helped revitalize the industry because at this time, like arcades were kind of slumping, you know, but the whole
home consoles were getting good.
Yeah, and home consoles were getting good, and also like fighting games are now a genre that are really good, so it's kind of big. One person would play another person in the arcade game, right? Because it's multiplayer, and that in general made arcade owners more money because now you're having two people play quarters instead of one.
Totally makes sense.
And that one person may win and stay on the machine, but they both have to put quarters in to play another match. So it's kind of like, and matches are quick. So it's like boom, 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 nonstop. So
if you were good at the game, you could spend a lot of money playing other people, and you were happy to do it because it meant you kept beating people.
Yeah,
you kept
you
paying
felt
money
good
to beat people.
Yeah, you're paying, but you're also winning, so it feels good.
Yeah.
So, and that's why the multiplayer component was so huge to the arcade cabinet. And so this is one of the few games that they say arcade owners and arcade players both loved, you know, because the single player games at the time, it was really about how long you could stretch it out. Like how long can you make your quarter last? And arcade owners would hate you if you took too long, you know, because they couldn't get a turnaround on the machine.
If you were really good, you would just put a quarter in the machine and beat the whole game in one go.
Yep.
Yeah.
But Street Fighter was like, no, the whole point is to play other players. So the matches are like, 5 minutes long, maybe. And then two new people come up, or one new person and the other person plays another quarter, you know, so it just nonstop. There was actually a big problem with bootleg piracy of this game. I did not know this. For example, in Mexico, Capcom sold 0 Street Fighter 2 machines. Also in Mexico, there were 200,000 Street Fighter 2 machines. So it didn't make any sense. So there were just bootleg machines everywhere. And Capcom actually ended up creating an entire legal department to deal with this problem. And they actually went after people. Like they went after arcade owners and they went after like piracy manufacturers in Taiwan. But the main reason there was piracy is the demand was so high, Capcom couldn't keep up. And so people resorted to buying bootleg boards from manufacturers in Taiwan and other places around the world because Capcom couldn't supply, you know,
makes sense.
It's a supply and demand problem. So some of these bootlegs though are actually kind of famous, and I kind of want to go into detail about this more because I think it'd be fun to do like famous bootlegs or something. But there's a version of the game called Street Fighter Rainbow, and the bootleggers actually changed the game's code a bit. So there are subtle differences that only like hardcore fans notice about like Rainbow versus Classic, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of cool.
That's funny.
Now, let's do the final thing where we talk about all the editions of Street Fighter 2. And I'm just pulling these straight from Wikipedia. Like I said before, I screen capped them because there are so many titles. So here we go.
Before we go, what are the general differences between these? Obviously, you're not going to get into the specific differences for every single one, but like what does Capcom change between these kinds of games?
I think it's quality of life changes as far as like bug fixes and stuff, because there were still a lot of bugs that the team wasn't happy with when the original game came out. But also the speed has changed, like the playable characters are changed, like small like additions. I didn't really want to get too into it because honestly, we would be in the woods for another hour
for sure
if we did that.
But it's mostly like balance changes. Do they add new characters or stages?
That kind of stuff. New stages, new characters. I think they also like Street Fighter 2 Turbo, I believe, is faster. If I recall, I could be just saying that out of nowhere, but I'm pretty sure it is faster. So yeah, it's really quality of life changes and stuff like that. But the arcade versions, there's actually only 5 that are mentioned here, and that's Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, Super Street Fighter 2, and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And that's funny to me because Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 is on NES because it's Super Street Fighter, you know? That's what I thought was interesting, but it's an arcade version as well. So console version had Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior. That came out on NES. The Mega Drive had Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. That was Sega Mega Drive. Then the Super Nintendo had two other versions called Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers, which I'm assuming adds more characters to the game. Then Street Fighter 2 came out on Game Boy. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival was Game Boy Advanced. Hyper Street Fighter 2, the Anniversary Edition, PlayStation 2. Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, and that was PS3, Xbox 360. And then Ultra Street Fighter 2 for the Nintendo Switch, which is the newest version. So there's a lot of versions of this game, and I did not go into detail on all of them because it would have taken way too long. And hey, I live in Washington. It's 100 degrees right now outside. Okay, everyone, I'm having a hard time.
I'm so sorry.
I am miserable right now. My apartment, my house is so hot. Yeah, that's right. Listeners, I'm complaining about my temperature. It's like 90 degrees in my house right now, and I can't do anything about it. So let's finish talking about this game and how crazy it is by talking about like the main point. So this is the TLDL, too long didn't listen, if you skip to the end of the podcast, of why this game changed fighting games and arcade games in general. So Street Fighter 2 revitalized arcades at a time when they were slumping. As Tyler said before, home consoles were coming up. This gave people a reason to go to the arcade to like fight random strangers in this video game. And it got heated. Like, I have friends that have told me stories about playing this in the arcade and being like, I am the best Street Fighter 2 player of all time in this neighborhood at this year, you know? So that was a thing. Street Fighter 2 created the combo system of most modern fighting games, as I said before, by altering the timing a little bit of button presses to get that going. Street Fighter 2 created the character-driven nature of most modern fighting games. Like, we all think like Smash Brothers, like that game is entirely character-driven. Like, what Nintendo property do you want to play? Well, Street Fighter 2 made that happen. And I mean, one of my favorite fighting games, Marvel vs. Capcom, was like the best of both worlds because you got Street Fighter characters and Marvel characters. It was great. So that was a big thing that they did. Street Fighter 2 helped create the esports scene, which I intentionally left out this episode because that needs to be an episode or episodes in itself. And honestly, we've been holding off on esports so long that I think I might start looking at it and doing it 2 weeks from now because I realized I'm like, this is a big part of gaming that we haven't really touched on. And I want to talk about it. And I think Tyler has some stuff to say too, because he knows about esports and we both follow esports to a certain extent. So it'll be good to talk about. Finally, Street Fighter 2 revolutionized multiplayer in arcades. The whole like getting 2 quarters in versus 1. While it had happened before and there were multiplayer arcade games, the fighting game is perfect for an arcade multiplayer. It's fast. Quarters go in and out quickly. It's what you need. Well, not out. They go in, but you know, it's
competitive too. Like, so people want to keep putting quarters in to prove themselves and to practice and get better.
Exactly. It almost plays on the human condition a little bit, you know, of competitiveness. So those are the big takeaways from this though. Street Fighter 2 is amazing. If you haven't played it, I highly recommend you do. I kind of wanted to end with like my personal experiences with Street Fighter because as a kid, I had a babysitter who had a Super Nintendo, and I don't remember which version I played. I think it was Street Fighter 2 Turbo is what I had played on the Super Nintendo they had. But I loved Blanca, and I just mashed buttons, and it was a great part of my childhood that I'll never forget. Okay. Do I know what I was doing? Absolutely not, but it was still fun. Tyler, did you play Street Fighter at all?
I think I've played a little bit in like small arcade things. There was a pizza place near my house that had a little tiny arcade area called Abby's Pizza. And I think they had a Street Fighter machine at one point, so I probably played a little bit there, but I wouldn't say I've put any significant time into playing a Street Fighter game or any fighting game, really.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I mashed buttons. I had fun. Short of Smash Brothers, I haven't really played a lot of fighting games at all, which we need to talk about too at some point because Super Smash Brothers is... I would say Super Smash Brothers was more my generation's thing than Street Fighter because Street Fighter 2 came out in 91 for arcades and 92 for like consoles. And honestly, like that, I was 4, so I missed out on a lot of this, and I really jumped on it later on. So, but yeah, so this is Street Fighter 2. I hope you all enjoyed it, and we will continue working and talking about the fighting game genre more I'm going to take a little breather from here, maybe talk about some other stuff. I mean, honestly, if we talk about esports, we will be talking about fighting games a little bit more.
Yeah.
So, but Tyler, what you been playing?
This week was kind of busy for me, so I didn't really play much. I got a little bit more Ratchet and Clank time in, but really haven't been playing that many video games. I've been playing a lot of League of Legends because at work we're currently in the middle of our internal League of Legends tournament, and so I've been practicing with my team, but I haven't been playing much else. So that's really been all my game time, is just practicing and getting better to win at our Silver League division for Riot Rumble that we do at work. So trying to win the jacket, and I'm not playing much else in pursuit of this jacket. What about you, Mike? What are you playing?
Well, I picked up a little bit of Mass Effect Andromeda again. I started playing through that. Yeah. I'm about halfway through the game, actually. I'm just kind of going on the main campaign, and if I see a side quest that interests me, I do it, but otherwise I'm just like sticking to the course, you know? Mm-hmm. It's fun. I like it. I get why it was dogged upon based on the other. There's not as much there, you know? I think I talked about this last episode too, where you can see the story is not as big. What sucks though is I can definitely tell it's like leaning towards a sequel. Like they thought this was going to be their next IP for Mass Effect, and I'm going to be bummed when it ends on a cliffhanger that will never see the light of day again.
Yeah, that's too bad. I saw an article recently that was it was about people who have played the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 now are giving Andromeda another try, and they're like, this wasn't as bad as we all
it's really not
clowned on it for.
Yeah, I think what they did to it that kind of threw it off is, so from what I understand with Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, what I remember, you were going through the story the whole time in this side quest, right? Well, Mass Effect Andromeda has the story and side quests, but they also have like these weird base building side quests because you're colonizing planets. That's the point of Mass Effect Andromeda, is you're there on the ship to colonize the Andromeda galaxy, and then shenanigans happen, right? And so it has this whole like, you got to do these 3 spires to then unlock the vault, to do the vault on each planet to make it livable, and it just feels very like Ubisoft going through Far Cry camps, you know? It just feels kind of repetitive after a while, and that is what bums me out. But the side quests of like solving murders or like going and finding new things about the story about like where an alien ship that disappeared that you're looking for is, like it's still got that same Mass Effect feel, and it's fun. Yeah. So if you ignore the whole colony building part of it and focus on the story part, it's a much better game. And it is an improvement, honestly. Like the controls feel good. Your guy just goes automatically into cover when you run up to something with your gun drawn, so you don't even have to think about it. And it like works really well, and it snaps back and forth. It's pretty cool. So I dig it. I'm playing Vanguard. I'm biotics in combat because that's what I'm all about. You know, I found a cheese build online, and I'm just cheesing. I'm just cheesing my way through the game. But yeah, it's been fun. I've also been playing some Smash Brothers 2, not Smash Brothers 2, Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, but Smash Brothers also. And I have been unlocking characters in that, and I found a little thing. If I leave it sleeping for like 10 minutes and come back to it, there's always a new challenger approaching because the game thinks I played it for 10 minutes and the timer went off. And so it's actually kind of a problem because now I don't put my Switch down like I should, because I either play the 10 minutes out on the adventure mode that I'm actually enjoying now because I kind of get it, or I just let it sleep, and then like 30 minutes later I'm like, oh wait, new challenger, and I go walk over and do the new challenger fight and then turn it off again. The key is you have to leave it sleeping in the adventure mode.
Oh.
Save it, back out of adventure mode, new challenger, and then go back into adventure mode again. It's kind of weird. It's funny. But I just assumed the timer would turn off if the Switch goes into sleep mode, and it turns out it does not. It still counts.
Yeah, one would think.
Count it. But yeah, so I haven't been playing anything though in the last 2 days because it has been so hot. I can't stress it. I don't want to turn my computer or my Xbox on to heat up my room even further because it's just a nightmare zone. But yeah, so I hope people enjoy this episode, though. It was a lot of research, and I, again, highly recommend you watch that video, The Making of Street Fighter 2. It's so good, and they go into much more detail than I do. But yeah, I think that's it for today. We do have some emails to read. Would you like to read an email?
Sure.
We have this very long email from Chris.
Okay. You want me to read it?
Yeah, I think so. You want to read it?
All right. Yeah, sure. Chris says, "Hey guys, I finally caught up, which means this email can be read on the show. On the Flappy Bird episode, you asked what the first game you bought with your own money was. Mine was The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. I must have been 8 or 9 at the time, so I was playing a lot of Pokemon Blue. One day, my aunt was babysitting me, and I was incredibly frustrated with all the random encounters in the game. So my little kid brain thought, if I can cut the grass, then I can stop the random encounters. I remembered I had some birthday money in my piggy bank I had saved up, around $30, and I asked my aunt if she could take me to KB Toys so I could buy a new game. At KB Toys, I found Link's Awakening, and I fell in love with it since the moment I first laid eyes on the box. It also helped that I could cut the grass for hours and hours without being bothered by random encounters. Regarding cheat devices, I did have an action replay for PS1. I remember using it to beat Final Fantasy Tactics and both Mega Man Legends games. I had no idea how they worked, and my limited English at the time made me figure out exactly what cheat did what after trial and error. Regardless, it was still a ton of fun, and handing Mega Man Juno his butt in Mega Man Legends with cheats felt awesome. As for the future of gaming being in a streamable form or service, I personally think this is a terrible idea, and it honestly bothers me more than it should. There have been countless times where games like GoldenEye 64 are born and die on one console because of licensing issues. Recently, it happened with Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, where it had been not for all the parties working together to re-release the game, it would still be unplayable except for those who bought it originally when it came out on the PS3 and 360. That's true.
I never played that.
Fear. It's pretty cool. It's a cool beat 'em up game. It's really worth playing, and I think it goes on sale on the Ubisoft store on PC. Well, and it's on Xbox, and it's on everything, so you can get it everywhere now because it just came out a few months ago.
Oh, I remember that. That was a big thing that they re-released it again.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a good game. It has a great soundtrack, too. It's done by Onomatoguchi, who does really good chiptune music in general, but yeah, highly recommend it. Another fear I have is that game developers will start preferring streaming over physical copies because it's cheaper to get out to the players and have limited physical copies blow up in price because scalpers will buy up all the copies and sell them for exorbitant amounts of money. That is a worry for sure. In the case that some games will be stream only, unless the company that holds that platform decides they will migrate those games into future consoles or make it so that they stay available for purchase, like Steam, then those games have a high possibility of disappearing forever. Not to mention if licenses are involved. Check the YouTube link I added in the email for something that's happening in Japan, where some games are on the verge of being lost forever because of lack of preservation planning by the developers, stigmas by the society, and there just not being the technology to preserve those games easily. In short, I'm not excited for the entire medium to move into stream-only model, and I hope that it doesn't happen anytime soon. And then Chris links a video called Japan's Game Preservation Crisis. I think you can find it if you just search for it. And it talks about how a lot of games are in danger of not being preserved, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah,
Chris.
I guess stream only. I didn't even think about the preservation angle on it. That's kind of a bummer. I'm going to watch that video, but
Yeah.
I don't mind digital copies.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I think stream only is, I didn't even think about the whole preservation angle. So I agree with you, Chris. That's true. Also, Link's Awakening is dope. Sorry, I
Link's Awakening is
I wanted
great.
to let you read the whole email before I got into it, but I was just like, Link's Awakening is so good. I beat it again for that Switch remake, and it is just
fantastic.
It's a glorious, beautiful game, and I love it so much.
Yep.
But thank you for the email, Chris.
Yeah. When it comes to digital copies, I kind of think those will in some form be preserved for a long time as long as emulators can keep on keeping up with consoles as they come out. I think that won't be as a problem, but streaming only for sure. Like if there's a game that's only on Google Stadia, like how are you going to get it after it's gone? It's just a video that's streamed to your computer. It's not even, your computer's not even running the file. So
they just give you all the code in a Google spreadsheet. Here you go.
Yeah, there you go.
A Google sheet
it's
with
just
all the code in it.
Yeah, source code in a Google Doc.
It's just a mess, an absolute mess.
Which is apparently how if you do a coding interview at Google, they make you write it in Google Docs, so you can't use any of your whatever your text editor uses to like help you write things, completion and stuff. Can't have any of that. They make you write code in a Google Doc.
Oh man, that sounds terrible.
Sounds awful. Yeah.
All right, here's
we got one more email.
Yeah, this is from Richard, and it's Stealth Games. Hello, Codexers. Codexters, excuse me. Ooh, that's better. Codexters.
That's good, yeah.
I started listening to your podcast about a week ago after looking for a video game podcast to vibe to while playing Binding of Isaac or Fights in Tight Spaces. Definitely recommend both. In your Splinter Cell episode, you said that there weren't really any popular stealth games, but did not mention the Hitman series. I love some tactical costume wearing bald guys. You ever push someone out of a window while dressed as a clown? Very satisfying. Hitman would be a dope series of episodes if you wanted to do that. All the way back to the run and gun games. You guys keep me entertained on the way to and from work and while gaming. Have a nice day, Richard. Thank you, Richard. That's so true. Hitman games are great.
True. They are, and they're putting out new ones. Like I think a new Hitman 3 came out, and they do it in like a really cool episodic format, I think, where you buy the game and then like new episodes sort of come out. I haven't played any of those, but I always hear good things. So you're right. That was an oversight. We didn't mention the Hitman series at all, and there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, and the cool
thing
thing
they were coming
about
out
them
around the same time as the Splinter Cell games too, back in the day.
They're like sandboxes, right? Like they're big levels that you can do all sorts of different things in weird ways, and I like that a lot. So I think that's cool.
Yeah.
So thank you for the email, Richard, and I will put Hitman on the list. But as always, if you want to send us an email, you can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can join our Discord by either emailing us and asking for an invite, or you can go to my Twitter profile at Mecoletta, MECOLETTA. Click on the pinned link at the top of my profile, and that's an invite that never expires. Also, Tyler's on Twitter too, at SneakerElf, if you want to get mad at him for forgetting about Hitman.
So sorry.
I forgot to, so you can get mad at both of us. But yeah, we'll be back next week. I don't know what we're talking about next week. It's kind of a surprise, right? Is it a surprise? Yep. I love surprises. All right. Well, we will see you all next week. Have a great week. Stay cool. And I will talk to you later. Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.